Hello.
I'm sleepy.
Yeah. I think I got about got these once you got a cat, woke up like 10 to 6, still order one of them of that day. Then he was born. What baby? 309.
Wheel. 296 mostly.
96. She been jamming on that stereo, like,
Oh yeah.
big blood, pass the cards, now you hear them.
All right. Let's talk about intelligence again. Today, mostly want to talk about the extreme ends of intelligence, giftedness and mental retardation. And so, I threw this slide up here to just kind of remind us that, you know, somebody cleaned your boards or erased my, but you remember 60-some% of people are right here within this average range. And the further we get from average, the fewer people they are. And the further we get from average, the more significant each point increase seems to be. So a person whose IQ is 120 is not 10% smarter than a person whose IQ is 110. It's a pretty huge gap. And then from 120 to 130 is an even larger gap. So the reason that's significant is when you're talking to an intellectually disabled individual, you cannot help but realize that they don't function the way you do. They're impaired. That's the way a genius feels when he's talking to us normal people, okay? They are massively beyond their ability. And that's important to think about because just about 99% of everything that exists was created by geniuses. The rest of us learn to use the stuff that they make, but we don't create the stuff that they make. I'm very good with technology. I love gadgets. But put me on a desert island with a screwdriver and a coconut and expect me to invent a microcircuit, that's not going to happen, right? So geniuses are building the world around us, so they're very, very important. So I wanted to first talk about the genius level of intelligence. What's some stuff we see about these people? So common popular term today is gifted. The old word was genius. The cutoff for genius level intelligence is an IQ of 130. Again, there's a whole lot of math involved in why we didn't just pick that number out of a hat, but none of us care about why the math says 130 is significant, just accept that it is. So these are the people that are enough above normal functioning that they actually carry a diagnosis. These people are distinctly and clearly abnormal. They're just abnormal in a positive direction. In general, geniuses succeed. They succeed in their careers, they succeed in their families, they succeed in, well, whatever they try to do. Because geniuses succeed, they're not really researched much. Really smart people tend not to draw a lot of negative attention to themselves. They tend not to go to jail, they tend not to get in car crashes, they tend not to get involved in criminal activity. Now, of course, there's exceptions to that. Anybody can have a crash, anybody can be a bad person, but in general, geniuses function so well that we typically just don't study them much. Because of that, there's a lot of information about geniuses that we would like to have that we don't really have. There have been a whole number of small-scale studies on geniuses. There's actually only been one big study on geniuses. Lewis Terman, that I mentioned last class, he's generally credited with creating the first American IQ test. He's generally credited with creating the first test that actually measured intelligence instead of scholasticism. And like I said, Terman himself was a genius. He became a professor really, really early, and he laid the groundwork for all of what we think of as being intelligence. Sometime in the late 1940s or early 1950s, Terman's team identified 1,400 genius-level sixth graders. Biggest group of geniuses that have ever been drawn together historically, and the biggest, nothing that size has ever been done since then. And he did lots and lots and lots of research and data collection on them the first time that he dealt with them. But what really makes Terman's research important is he then followed up with them every single year, all through the 50s, all through the 60s, all through the 70s. Terman died in the late 1970s, but his team continued the research into the 80s, 90s, 2000s. A lot of these people, they call themselves the termites, Terman's termites. You don't probably ever know that as long as you live. But a lot of the termites have, of course, died now, because that's been since the 1940s and 50s. A lot of them are still alive, and he followed them through high school, through college if they went, through their careers, through their families. And he just learned a lot of stuff over a long period of time about the gifted. And he published something almost every year, but his most famous publication is called Terman's Misconceptions About the Gifted. And he's most famous for showing 5 things that you probably believe to be true about the gifted that are patently untrue. So I'm about to change screens, and I'm going to put up here things that are not true, not things that are true, okay? These are all misconceptions about the gifted. And when I tried to write misconceptions about the gifted, it kept pushing me down onto a second line, and so instead of changing my font size, I just changed the word to lies. So these are 5 lies about the gifted that, again, more than 90% of the population believe these things to be true. So the first one that he talked about is the idea that the gifted are socially peculiar. I took some examples from old children's cartoons, Jimmy Neutron, Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory, more modern cartoons, the Twin Sisters from Johnny Test. You want non-cartoon examples, Disney's Nutty Professor, Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory. There are exceptions. There are shows and media that portray geniuses as good, respectable, heroic types, but they're rare. Even the shows that do tend to portray them with some pretty serious social problems. My favorite show currently is Bones. Does anybody watch Bones? I love that show. And Temperance Brannon, yeah, I'm blank there for a second. She is the hero of the show, but they do make it a point at least once an episode to show her doing something socially inappropriate. They kind of, because smart people just make a good target. Now, this is not true. The truth is that geniuses have better friendship skills than normal people, better leadership skills than normal people, better social integration than normal people. They function socially better than most people. So what we see is, one, if you're interacting with a genius, you're probably never going to know that they're a genius unless there's an actual reason for you to know. The person that's obsessed with you realizing how smart he is, almost always a he, can be a she, is usually somebody with an IQ in the upper 100 teens that's smart enough to know they're smarter than most people, but not smart enough to know that everybody's hating them, right? So geniuses usually get along with everybody. I think that's very, very important. Highest IQ that I personally ever scored is a chemistry professor at University of Georgia in Athens, and I got to know him pretty well because he owns a lot of farmland in DeKalb County. So, I talked to him a lot. And I asked him once, since he was the highest IQ that I've ever personally known, I asked him what his definition of intelligence was. And he said that he believed an intelligent person could get along with anywhere, under any circumstances, in their own terms. And watching him, I realized that nobody at UGA knew that he was a cattle rancher in Alabama. When he was at the cow sales and stuff like that, he was wearing his overalls and flannel shirts. Nobody knew that he was a chemistry professor. Not that he was keeping it a secret, but just when he was at cow sale, he talked like farmer from Alabama. When he was in chemistry professor mode, he talked like a chemistry professor. So he was extremely socially integrated. Most of the gifted are. Another thing that is very commonly believed is that the gifted are physically inferior. If you can't pick on them for social problems, pick on them for being 98-pound weaklings, pick on them for being 350-pound neck-bearded Linux gurus, pick on them for being uncoordinated, unattractive, not physically fit. There are certainly exceptions. Stephen Hawking has severe physical problems, and he is one of the most brilliant people, probably the most intelligent person that is currently alive, and one of the most intelligent people ever. But in general, a person needs a pretty healthy body to be that smart, to drive a brain that's effective. So on average, again, plenty of exceptions, but on average, true geniuses are taller than average, stronger than average, more physically coordinated than average. And when judged by people who do not know their intelligence, geniuses are generally perceived as being more physically attractive than average. That kind of sucks. So they're tall, strong, healthy people that look better than the rest of us. But, again, this Dilton Doily was from an old Archie comic book that I used to read. He was the genius that was short and skinny and all that. So, again, simply just not true. Smart people, of course, are on a physical bell curve, but in general, they're shifted toward the good end of it. There's a long-standing belief that while giftedness may show up and even be important in childhood, by the time you become an adult, you're going to burn out and lose your giftedness. And they say early ripe means early rot and stuff like that. There's absolutely no truth to this. If you are diagnosed genius on a valid IQ test by 7 years of age, you will almost certainly retain genius-level intelligence for the rest of your life. It does take a little while for intelligence scores to stabilize, so I wouldn't want to make too strong predictions about a 3-year-old. But by 7, those intellectual habits are pretty much established. One thing that does kind of lend an illusion of truth to that statement, though, is I kind of touched on it last class. The school systems persist in calling IQ tests that are actually versions of scholastic aptitude tests. So I was in the gifted program in my school, and my school IQ is somewhere in the neighborhood of 132. That should be genius level intelligence, right? But when I started taking real IQ tests, I found out I'm just kind of bright, So I did not burn out. I didn't lose genius level intelligence. I was just misdiagnosed. So we do see a lot of cases like that. Honestly, only about 1% of us are geniuses, but about 2.5% of the school is geniuses. So it just seems like their tests are kind of geared to overestimate a person's intelligence. But that's an invalid test. That's not actually losing your giftedness. The fourth thing that we believe to be true is that giftedness, while it may be convenient and useful, it doesn't really predict success. Well, again, that's just not true. I think I kind of said this last class. Anywhere within that normal range, intelligence is not a good predictor of success. If you've got an IQ of 102 and your cousin tested at 99, I am not going to predict that you're going to be more successful than your cousin. Within that range, what predicts success is persistence, motivation, hard work, stuff like that. And the reason is the world is created by average people for average people. If your IQ is 110 or beyond, I'm going to predict success. I'm not going to necessarily predict that you're going to be king of the universe, but person that's that much smarter than average has an easier time succeeding. You get up into the 120s, yeah, it's pretty much a given. You get up to genius level, and it's almost becomes a how can these people fail? In an economic competition between me and Bill Gates, I lose, period. In fact, I like to remind myself that the only money that I do have is money that Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Carlos Slim aren't using, right? Because if they needed my money, they would have my money, right? It's just that simple. So giftedness is probably the most important predictor of success. Can gifted people fail? Yeah, but not freaking often, okay? It's kind of like me playing poker against a 6-year-old, right? I will win unless I just let them win to be nice, like Bill Gates let me keep some of my money, right? So, and then the fifth one, the one that actually was the single most believed, something like 96% of the population believed that genius level intelligence somehow predisposes you to being crazy. That is absolutely not true. In fact, if you really look at it, the numbers, it looks like the number one predictor of being crazy is low intelligence. There's other stuff, there's family problems, there's health problems, but the number one predictor of being crazy seems to be low intelligence. The number one defense against being crazy seems to be high intelligence. To the point that just about 90% of the psychologically disordered are also mentally retarded. Now, that's kind of a mean thing to say, but it is something that we need to be aware of, especially in America, where we've become so proud of our psychological diagnoses. We want a label. And every single time somebody comes up to me and goes, now you know I'm bipolar, that evil part of me goes, and you're probably mentally retarded. Because you just don't see many bipolars that aren't dumb as a bag of hammers, you know. Are crazy. Now, if you've been diagnosed bipolar, you went to the wrong doctor. Bipolar is extremely rare. And when I say extremely, I mean extremely. I've only known one bipolar, and maybe two. One I'm not sure about. Man, bipolars are crazy. People have mood swings. Who the crap don't have mood swings? I'm bipolar. How do you know? I had a mood swing once. Shut up. Stop talking to me. I have mood swings every freaking day. I'm not bipolar. I just have poor coping skills. None of these things are true. Why do we believe these things? One very simple reason. These people make us feel bad about ourselves. And it's so much easier to tear somebody down than it is to build ourselves up. You see exactly the same thing in racism, exactly the same thing in sexism, exactly the same thing in any other ism. This is nothing more than a way to try to make ourselves feel better by making somebody else look worse. That's sad. That's not nice. We should not do that. I use cartoon examples on purpose, though, because it's a social. Yes.
That's just how society wants us to view them.
That's exactly how. And with the cartoons, we're training our children early. A 4-year-old watching Johnny Test laughing at how goofy the twin sisters are does not have the cognitive ability to realize that it's probably not okay to make fun of people that are functioning better than you, right? So we train them early to hate and fear smart people. I actually had a moron say to me, "Man, your kid is smart." Well, thank you. I worked hard to help him develop intelligence. I hope he's not too smart, though. Those people have problems. You're dumb. I hope you're not too dumb, because those people have problems. Yeah. But, in general, gifted people live happier, healthier, more successful lives than the rest of us. And that's honestly all I need to know to answer any question about the gifted. They're doing just fine.
But you know, only the good die young.
But true, but statistically, that's not true.
That's why the rock and roll is good.
Yep. Now, let's talk about the other end, mental retardation, which again, I said last class, this is an emotionally charged word. If you prefer to say cognitively disabled or intellectually disability, that's fine. I'm just using the old term because that's what we kind of use. So the mentally retarded have IQs of 70, again, exactly as far below normal as giftedness is above normal. The mentally retarded don't have as many negative stereotypes as the gifted do. Honestly, if you're making fun of retarded people, you're probably just a bad human being. But the one stereotype that we do tend to carry without thinking about it is we do tend to perceive the mentally retarded as being institutionalized. And of course, some people are dysfunctional enough that they need to be in an institution, but 90% are out in the world doing all of the things that the rest of us do. Most of the mentally retarded drive, they marry, they work jobs, they go to work every day, they do everything that the rest of us do. The issue is they consistently and persistently need help more often than the rest of us do. Everyone needs help occasionally, right? So like, say for instance, you have an unplanned death in the family, you have an unplanned pregnancy, you have a long-term illness, you can find yourself needing social services, and most people that aren't evil are very grateful that these things are available. You've got your WIC, you've got your food stamps, you've got your other stuff, but most people that need these services use that as a springboard to get restabilized and get back to a normal life. The mentally retarded seem like they're always taking social services. They never quite can persistently stay stable long enough to really make it on their own. Anybody can have momentary stupidity and commit a crime and end up in jail. Mentally retarded make up less than 2% of the population. They make up 80%, 75 to 80% of the jail population. So they're extremely overrepresented in jail. They're extremely overrepresented in mental health centers. They're extremely overrepresented in emergency rooms. You know, anybody have a lawnmower accident and end up in the emergency room? I doubt there's too many of us in this room that haven't been to the emergency room at some point in their life. But it seems like the mentally retarded are always going to the emergency room. They don't, you know, things like maintaining consistent health insurance is too complex for them. So if they do have a problem, it's typically an emergency. So because they need more help, there has been a lot more research done on them. But again, don't think of these people as totally dysfunctional. Most of them live perfectly normal lives. They do all the things that everybody else does. They just are not quite as successful on average, and they have more problems on average. One thing to think about, again, I'm not being mean and judgy, but it is worth thinking about. The economic value of the mentally retarded doesn't need to be underrepresented. They are capable of doing jobs and enjoying jobs and becoming experts at jobs that many of us would find boring, repetitive, demeaning. Y'all are college students, and y'all have done whatever it took to get where you needed to be. So a lot of y'all have worked fast food. A lot of y'all have worked Foodland. A lot of y'all have worked jobs that require no cognitive investment. Thing is, even if you're still in that job, that's not where you want to be 5 years from now, right? The mentally retarded can be the best fry cook McDonald's has because they can take tremendous pride in getting that fry out as soon as that buzzer beeps. Now, you're normal intelligence, and you're over here singing songs in your head when that buzzer goes off, and you've done burned the fries, right? Because you got bored and distracted and stopped paying attention. So the mentally retarded are very valuable members of society, but they do have a lot of problems. Now, one thing that we do not do with the gifted, we don't talk about levels of giftedness. And the reason we don't is because the gifted are so much smarter than the people making the test that we don't really know what the numbers mean. The highest IQ that we have ever scored is a lady named Marilyn Vos-Savant, who scores 272 on the Stanford Binet. The second highest is a guy named Billy something that scores 268. Now, how many of us would be confident arguing that Marilyn is 4 points smarter than Billy, right? Both of these people are so much smarter than I am that they're just like, yeah, you're a genius. Nothing else to say about that. Most experts will actually say that a score above 150 becomes invalid anyway, because by that point, the test didn't have any way to really measure true intelligence, and it just evolved into bizarre trivia and stuff. So, but in that range, 130 to 150, my God, these people are smart. Now, the mentally retarded, since they're functioning less well than an average person, it is easy to divide them up into levels. There's a neat chart, if you don't like writing stuff, on page 298 that tells the levels. It's not that much to write, so either way. But 90% of the mentally retarded fall into the range that we call mildly mentally retarded. These are people with IQs from 50 to 70. Obviously, closer to 50, you're going to be more impaired than closer to 70. But in general, we say that these are the people that live perfectly normal lives, just needing more help. They've got jobs, they go to work every day, they marry, they drive, they do all the things that other people do. And so that's most of them, 90%. So less than 2% of the population is mentally retarded. Of the ones that are, 90% of them are in this mild range. There are some diseases that can put you into this range, but most disease forms of mental retardation actually put you in the lower ranges. The one that we see a lot in this range is Down syndrome. Down syndrome people tend to have IQs in the 60 range, a little higher, a little lower. We have worked with Down syndrome people that had IQs, I think the highest Down syndrome IQ ever scored was 104. So Down syndrome people don't even have to be mentally retarded, they're just more likely to. But Down syndrome is fairly mild, fairly rare. So most of the people in this range actually don't have anything physical going on. They're perfectly biologically normal. They're just people that never learn how to think and process information. You go below this and you have more serious impairment. The moderately mentally retarded, kind of roughly the 35 to 50 range, there's typically always something biological going on here. There's a lot of different forms of mental retardation that have names like phenylketonuria, microcephaly, and hydrocephaly, and Down syndrome, and all that. It is possible to get, well, it's just not possible to get down to this level of dysfunction without there being something physically wrong with your brain. These people function, so if the mildly retarded function like normal adults that just need more help, the moderately mentally retarded, basically we're talking about adults that function like 8, 9, 10-year-old kids. They dress themselves, they feed themselves, they can prepare meals for themselves, they read simple stuff, young adult novels, comic books. They're not going to hold down a job unless it's a job that is designed for the mentally retarded with lots of supervision and lots of structure. Generally, they're not going to be asked to compete economically. They typically don't marry, they typically don't reproduce, they usually do not live in institutions, they usually live at home in a family situation, and it's not a situation that needs lots and lots of care, because they're like big kids. They feed themselves, you go to work, they make breakfast for themselves, they play Xbox and read a book and, bathe themselves, and just all the stuff that a big kid can do, but you can't ask them to compete economically, so more impairment. Yes. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, the Olympic people can be mildly or moderately, in there. So they do a lot of neat stuff, but you just don't expect them to get up, go to work every day, and function like a normal person. Now you get below that, and you're getting into some pretty serious health problems. It's hard to get an IQ in the 20s without bad things being going on there. Seriously deprived oxygen distribution to the brain, much shorter life expectancy. Generally, we're talking here adults that function as toddlers, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. They may be able to pull on their own clothing on and off. They're probably going to have trouble with buttons and zippers. They can certainly feed themselves, but they probably can't prepare their own food. They generally don't learn to read. They usually speak in very restricted vocabularies. More problems. While some families do try to care for these people, generally it's better for the individual and the family for these people to live mostly in a group home. they need enough medical care, they need enough professional supervision, and the group homes for this level of mental retardation really become kind of like daycares for adults. It's a place to socialize, but they're not really expected to be educated because they cannot function the way that we function. And then at the very bottom end of the scale is what they call profound mental retardation, IQ scores of 20 or less. Remember that on an IQ test, you get 1 point for being able to breathe without assistance. You get a point for keeping your heart beating without assistance. You get a point for being able to swallow when food is placed in your mouth. So people with IQs in the teens are so impaired that they're barely functioning. They usually only live for several years, severe health problems. Thankfully, the numbers get rarer as we go down. About 90% are mildly retarded, about 7 to 8% are moderately retarded, 1 to 1.5% are severely retarded, and the profoundly is very, 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 very rare. It's a terrible and heartbreaking thing. But those are what we call the levels of mental retardation. Now, if any of y'all end up working with a school system, it's not important at all because these are the terms psychologists use, but I just throw it out here. The school system uses the same divisions we use, but they like to have their own special names for it. We don't know why. So what we call mildly mentally retarded, they call educably mentally retarded, or EMR. What we call moderately, they call trainably, TMR. What we call severely, they call dependent. And what we call profoundly, they call life support. Since I mentioned the school system, I'll say this. The way that we have educated these people have changed about 25 years ago with the implementation of No Child Left Behind, which was a good idea, but it's generally admitted to be a failure. It was not a good deal. But historically, back when I was in school, the mildly mentally retarded, or what the school calls the EMR, were the kids that were in the special ed class. And then every county or tri-county area, depending on your population, had a special ed class for the moderately mentally retarded. And then the severely and profoundly were not educated. What happened with No Child Left Behind is that most of the moderately mentally retarded have been promoted up into the normal classroom. Now, there's some cutoff, so it's like, it seems like below 60 IQ, you don't go into the normal classroom. But what happens is, all of a sudden, you're getting a lot of people with IQs of 66 and 68 that are being asked to compete with children with IQs of 95 and 100 and 110. The problem with that, of course, I believe that everybody should be given every possible opportunity, but the problem is you're asking people to do work that they cannot do, so they're getting stressed out and worried. Then to try to help them succeed, you're changing the way you deliver your lectures to make them more accessible to them, which is making the normal students have to put up with so much more repetition and boredom, basically. And when it comes down to kids causing problems in school, the subnormal child that is angry and frustrated is going to cause the most problems, but the smart kid that's bored is going to be a real darn close second. So what's happening is 50 years ago, geniuses were bored in school, but most normal people didn't really find it that bad. Everybody's conditioned to claim we hate school. We have to. It's just the way we're raised. But most people didn't actually hate school. What we're seeing now is that normal kids are as bored as geniuses used to be, and geniuses are losing their minds. So I don't think that change has helped the mentally retarded individuals, nor has it helped the normal individuals. The moderately retarded have been now put into the special ed classrooms. The only problem with that is the teachers, except for the ones that just graduated a few years ago, the teachers that are running special ed were trained to deal with the mildly mentally retarded, so they're working with a level of retardation that's more severe than they were trained in. And then the severely retarded, which were never even sent to school, are now being sent to the special ed classroom, and these people are impaired enough that they cannot be educated. So highly trained specialists that have really focused on the moderately mentally retarded are now not really doing much more than providing free babysitting services, which is a useful provision, but it's not, it's not helping, because you can't teach these people to read. You can't teach them to engage in normal social activities. So it seems like we've made things make stuff worse for everybody. And that saddens me, but I don't have a good solution, so I don't know how to fix it, but it's definitely something to be aware of. So, question whichever I say it. Know these 4 levels of mental retardation. Question 21. Yeah, and so then I will click it forward one more time. Last thing I want to say about mental retardation. 90% of the mentally retarded are mildly retarded. 90% of the mildly retarded don't have anything physical going on. And if there's nothing physical that we can identify, we call that familial retardation. They need a better name, environmental retardation. But what it means is these people were raised in circumstances that they never learned how to use their cognitive faculty. And I don't have this as a question on my study guide, but I do sometimes ask it, so kind of make a 21B note. The 4 things that correlate with familial retardation is poor nutrition, poor intellectual stimulation, poor medical care, and poor emotional support. So this little bit in the second paragraph. If you don't get the nutrition you need, your brain is not going to develop the number of interconnections that it needs, at which point it becomes a biological problem. It's no longer just a social problem. If you don't get the intellectual stimulation you need, you don't develop the cognitive habits and curiosity that you need. If you don't get the emotional support that you need, you don't develop the curiosity and the motivation and the desire that is going to cause you to develop your brain. And of course, if you don't get medical care, all sorts of diseases and things like that can impair cognitive function. So the problem is we're seeing people that are functioning as mentally retarded individuals, but they're doing it for no reason other than they never had a chance. And that's bad. Mental retardation is fairly rare. It's less than 2%. We don't have an exact number. But if 90% of that less than 2% was just made that way because of bad family, that means we could make mental retardation something like 1/5 of 1% instead of 2%. Tens of millions of lives could be made more functional if we could help these people. And the problem is we have shown how easy it is to help them. If we can get a child out of these kind of families by the time they're somewhere between 2 and 5 years of age or somewhere before age 5, we can usually raise them to adulthood with no symptoms whatsoever. Between 5 and 10 or 11, we can undo a lot of the damage. By the time you're getting into the 11, 12-year-olds, there's no coming back from that. Their biological brain development, their cognitive habits have been established. And that's one of the reasons why I stopped working with DHR years before I closed my practice. DHR's motivation is to keep families integrated as long as possible and reintegrate families if at all possible. And that's kind of like No Child Left Behind. On paper, that sounds right. That's the motivation that you want these people to have. But the result has been children left in harmful situations until so much damage was done that by the time we take them out of a harmful situation, there's no ability to fix them. And that infuriates me because none of these people need to be this way. Now again, we're talking about close to 2% of the population, so these are people in your neighborhood. These are people that you went to school with. You know the people that I'm talking about. And it's called familial retardation because it does run in families. You find one person and start looking at the rest of the families, you find out that their parents are impaired, their cousins are impaired. You know, it's just a whole family structure of not learning how to think. In my neighborhood, and I'll tell this story just because it's horrible, and then let y'all go to have your fun spring break. But in my neighborhood, it was a family that I won't identify, but every member of the family was cognitively impaired to some extent or another. And of course, being cognitively impaired, they had a million kids, and they were just, all over the place. But the two that I particularly think about were identical twin brothers, one of whom married and lived right here, and the other one stayed single but lived directly across the road. And back then, social services had a little bit more authority, and so on the birth of the couple's fourth child, welfare came in and said, you're going to lose your benefits if you keep having children, so we're going to give you a choice, sacrifice your benefits now or sterilization. Now, you can't do that these days, and that's probably good because sterilizing people is getting pretty close to Nazi philosophy, but I mean, there is something to be said about not reproducing if you can't take care of yourself. But man was mentally retarded. He wasn't a moron. He said, okay, sterilize me for free stuff. Vasectomy is so much less invasive than tubal ligation. So he gets vasectomy. A year later, when he's pregnant again, or she's pregnant again, when DHR comes in to ask what happened, he said something that was perfectly reasonable in his mentally retarded little world. Well, you fixed me, but you didn't do nothing to my brother. Two mentally retarded males sharing a mentally retarded wife. What's the chance that anything good is coming out of this family? If those children had been removed from that family early, they would have grown up to be perfectly normal people. But they were again left there until they had no hope. At this time, they are probably reproducing another generation of people that have no hope. And it's just, that's not good. So in general, we want to do everything we possibly can to help the mentally retarded, but I think we also want to start looking for some ways to decrease passing that on. So definitely something to think about. So, spring break, y'all ready? Anybody do anything really cool for spring break?
Math.